My question for today is, can video games be good for you? In this interview, we will dive deep into 10 ways video games can actually be good for you. Be sure to stick around for the whole interview, as the 10th reason could really change your life for the better. My guest today is Jonathan Harrison. He gave a successful TED Talk about how video games empower real-world success. He is also the author of Mastering the Game: What Video Games Teach Us About Real Life. And Jonathan is an old school video game expert. He won the Blockbuster Video Game Tournament for his region back in the day. Jonathan has been a lifelong friend of mine. Jonathan, welcome to the channel. So we've been friends for a long time. I mean, ever since I was 5. And I remember you as a kid giving your parents a list of like why video games are good for us. And then you shared that list with me, and I shared it with my parents to let me play video games. Do you remember that?
You know what? Until you mentioned that had been one of those things lost to the echoes of time. But it's so funny you mentioned that. Yeah, I do.
And then one day I see your TED Talk. I'm like, in a changing world, it's good to see that some things don't change. So let's talk about the 10 ways that video games can improve your life. And first, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do for a living and such?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently working at a university. My role there is Director of Learning and Organizational Development. So I get to help with training and development, as well as do a lot of work internally, help others discover ways to unlock their full potential. So my job is to help others do what they do best. So that's what I do as my day job. And then, of course, I enjoy exploring the life lessons we can learn from video games, both on a website and through my writings, including one published and one upcoming work on that same topic.
The first way video games help us is time management. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. We always talk about time management. It's such a popular topic. In reality, what we're really talking about is our energy management. It's amazing. We spend time on things that, well, let me say it this way. It feels like we're spending a lot of time on things that are difficult or things we don't want to do. The beauty of things we enjoy, where we kind of dive into that flow state, is that time kind of disappears. And so we think about time management. It's really just about prioritizing, using our energy, and allocating our own resources in a way that's going to help us. But games can teach us specific strategies. And one of them I think about is, you and I both grew up in households where we grew up with Nintendo. And it's something we were able to enjoy when we hung out on those Sunday afternoons. But there was always the idea about, how much time is too much. And so when you're young and you have a limited amount of time to play video games, you got to manage your time well. You got to figure out, how do I get the best games and only spend my time on the things that matter. And I think just in that approach, there are a few things we can learn about how we manage our time. But the other thing that we learn about in games is sometimes time's a finite resource. And so it's so important with those finite resources like time that we're using it in the ways that are best and in line with our values and the things that matter most to us. So that's one way I've noticed. Never mind all the games that have those timers that count down.
Yes.
Force you to, okay, figure it out. You got 2 minutes to get from point A to point B.
Exactly. And have you heard of a concept called Parkinson's Law? So what I found is, like, especially when I was in grad school, I would tell myself, I have 2 hours to finish this paper. That's it. And then I'm going to spend time with my family. And by putting that time frame, it helped me be more efficient. Whereas if I just said, I'm going to write and just kind of see what happens, that adrenaline doesn't kick in. What are your thoughts about the Parkinson's Law?
Well, I think it's part of why everyone hates so many of their Zoom meetings that we've endured over the past 2 years, is because by default, we have systems that assign an hour block to a meeting. And there are many meetings that are maybe 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. But because there's an hour of time set aside, the tendency, according to Parkinson's Law, right, is to fill up that time, is to expand to the time of which you've budgeted for it. Which, my tip for that is make the meeting shorter. Think about it in terms of the way that, like speedrunners do. So speedrunning is a subculture that's out there in the video game world where people try to beat games as fast as possible. And sometimes it involves tricks and glitches. Sometimes it involves shortcuts. But basically, you figure out, how do I start the game and finish it as fast as possible? And if you treat your meetings or you treat your tasks that way, say, what are the things I need to do? And how can I get them done in a way that's quick and efficient and get me to the end quickly so that I have this extra time to do other things? So that's I think, one way Parkinson's law, speed running, and what we all have to do on our task list can work together.
Let's talk about point number 2, which is collaboration. How do video games help us in that area?
Yeah, well, we even started talking a bit before the show, reminiscing in a way, talking about TMNT, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We were of that era, that age, the first go around. And so everyone was so excited. In fact, speaking of specific memories, I remember on your birthday when you received the TMNT 2, the arcade game for the NES. I remember it there on your back patio by the pool, opening when you opened that up, and there it was. It's like, oh man, this is about to get real. And so in that game, on the NES, it was just 2 players. In the arcade, it was 4. And, since then, there's been a lot of versions of similar games. But it was all about working together as a team. And so one of the things that are part of that is communication and being able to work with your teammate. When you and I were playing, being able to say, oh, wait, who's got lower life? Who needs that pizza power up? And in fact, I think we had some fights about that when someone, I will let the viewers decide, someone took someone else's pizza who needed it more. And so we see that sort of thing happen in the real world, right? Where if there's not that communication, there can be conflict that occurs. But when you work together, when you develop strategies, when you communicate effectively, you can get much further in the game. In fact, that game, along with Contra and some of the other cooperative video games, a lot of them worked off of a system where if one of the players lost all their lives, the other player could jump back in the game if they stole one of the other player's extra lives. So, if I'm just not good at a stage, you've got 3 lives left, I lost all 3 of mine, I could actually tap that button, take one of your extra lives and hop in there. And so in that way, as a team, though, you can do more than just one person on your own. And I think that's something else we see in video games. In fact, that's one of the reasons why a lot of video games would scale both difficulty and number of challenges you face if there was more than one person playing. Because the developers realized that if 2 people take this on, it's no longer even a challenge. Well, the good news is in our personal lives, in our work, in our business, difficulty doesn't scale the same way. And so there's no reason that I can think of not to collaborate more frequently than what we do.
And also some of the video games like Super Mario 3, although it's 2 players, you would do one level and then you die and then you do another level and your friend would play. And I really do think it taught us how to share as friends. I mean, that's the thing we're going to be teaching our children, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you remember Mario 3 had that mode where you could enter the original Mario Brothers and go head-to-head against each other. And the winner would actually be able to continue their turn. So you could challenge each other, and actually, like, one person ends up getting the short end of the stick if they're better. But the other thing I noticed, too, right, is that there's an advantage when you're player 2. Maybe not so much in Mario 3 because if one person completes a level, the other one goes. But in some games, you would have the ability to watch that other person play. And if they found a surprise trap, or like, in the Mega Man games where you're taking turns playing, making it a 2-player game because you're sharing, the other person would go ahead and discover some of the things that were surprises, and you could learn from their mistakes. And learn that way too. So there's something to be said for that as well.
That's right. And before we move on to the next point, I just got to say, I think we had an advantage when we were kids. You couldn't really save any game at any time. Like, there were some games you just couldn't. It's like, you turn it off, Mom, and the game's done. And I've been playing this game 2 hours, and I could always talk my mom into, if she's listening to this video, sorry, Mom, but You know, should give me 5 or 6 hours of gameplay. Speaking of, since we're both dads now, what limits do you have on your own child on video games?
So it's summertime now. If you're watching this live or near to when it's recorded. And in that way, we tend to be a little more lax. During a typical week, we limit as little as possible during the week. We give a little more time, but usually the max I go is 1 to 2 hours per day. There's some research out there that talks about anything over 3 hours a day is detrimental in a variety of different ways. But anything less than that, anything 1 to 2 hours has a lot of benefits. If you look at the research, there's absolutely different skills and developmental skills that are built that way that they can measure with brain scans and so forth. So for us personally, we keep it right around that 1 to 2 hour limit. We don't really go for that binge thing, but we're a little looser during the summertime because that's some of the way that kids interact today is playing online multiplayer games. And so, you know, where you and I might have just picked up the phone or hop on our bike, you know, kids today, especially during the past couple of years with COVID and all that, there was a lot more of this online gaming as part of their social life and part of how they interact.
That's good. And I'm just so glad. I feel like we're being balanced too. We're not saying to parents like, oh, unlimited video games. We're saying video games can help you, but in moderation. The third thing, and this is something I learned from you when I was, 7 or so, is video games teach you map reading skills. Why would it be important to know map reading skills even in the year 2022? You know, when we have GPSs and such.
Yeah. Well, but who hasn't misread a GPS at this point? I know the GPS correction gets you back on course, but it's also very successful and helpful when it comes to plotting your course. We recently took a trip out west and were able to drive around some of the western states, Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and see that beautiful country out there. And in doing so, before I even got there, I went ahead, looked at the maps, and I started planning. Like, how do I get across? What's a good path to take, and what does an alternate look like? And so, video games can also encourage us, and especially with the bigger open world games you see today, things like Elden Ring or Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. You have these massive worlds where you've got to figure out, like, what's a way to look at this map, figure out where am I going, what's the best way to get there. And how do I make a plan around that?
Yes, and just from following you on social media and such, I know you're all about having a plan and having goals. Why do we need a map, so to speak, in our life? Why should we have goals as opposed to just a lot of people don't even make New Year's resolutions now? What do you think?
Yeah, I think look, goals are like a GPS. It's funny we're talking about GPSs now, but you got 3 things you need to know, right? The first thing you need to know is where you are. Where are you today? You need to know where you're going, and then you need the path to get there. And so goals are simply that process in real life for anything that is that you want to see different. If you wish to explore your potential in an area, whether it's education, whether it's a musical instrument or that ability, whether it's some hobby, take a look at where are you today? What is my current skill level? What do I currently know? What is my financial situation, right? And then say, where do I want to be? And realize that there's going to be time between now and there. If you're trying to make a savings for retirement, you need to see, where do I want to be when it's time to retire? How old do I want to be? If I don't think about that, it won't just happen. If I don't have a plan, then you're just, it's luck. And don't leave things like that to luck. This is your future. And this is something that I think everyone needs to do, is have, whether it's a financial plan or a plan for their time. If we don't do that, before you know it, time spins itself and life passes you by. And so again, know where you are today, know where you want to go, and then create that plan to get there. Even if you can only see a little bit down the road, even if you want to plan that 1 or 2 hours at a time, at least be sure you're going in the right direction. Because you cannot get, well, some people might argue, yes, if you go far enough east, you eventually will end up west.
Yeah.
But why? The world is really big. if I want to go one state over, I'm not going to circumnavigate the whole world just to get there. So have a plan.
That's so good. The fourth point is that video games teach you innovation.
Well, you know what? In the work world, there's not so much a trade secret anymore. Anything you want to know about an industry, you can usually look it up. So there's not really a competitive advantage for things that are currently being done. In order to really stand out or to get ahead, you have to be innovative. But innovation is not as hard as people make it out to be. We make it this mysterious thing, and we make it sound like, you know, at some point you have to be this genius that in the middle of the night you have this idea and you go out and you do something with it. You know, I heard this somewhere. I think it was Brian Tracy who said it. Every one of us has between 3 to 5 ideas in the course of a year that if we simply put them into action, we would free up our financial future. We wouldn't have to think about that if we implemented them. Yeah. And the challenge is we all have these ideas. We don't always put them into action, because innovation can be simply using something in a way that it hasn't been used before, but it doesn't mean it's not used that way in a different context. And so, you know, it's knowing your tools. You know, I go back to Mega Man 2 because that's one that just, not only is it one of our favorites, you and I spent so much time with Mega Man 2, with Mega Man 3, 4 and 5. That entire franchise was, you know, bread and butter. That was our hangouts amongst some of the other games. But those ones really just, we had a love for. And in those games, you begin to realize that you have these different items that you can get from defeating robot masters. And not only are they useful against certain enemies, they have their weak points, they actually have places that you can use them in the stages in maybe innovative ways. And in fact, one of the bosses in Mega Man 2 at the Wily stages near the end there, you have to get really creative with how you use certain items in order to defeat this one boss at the end of one of those stages where there's these walls and floating platforms. And it's just, you know, if you've played that game, you know this one is kind of the place where a lot of people die. So innovation is necessary in business, in your life, because otherwise you're maintaining status quo. And you know, for some people that might not sound so bad, but that wouldn't be so bad if the world around us didn't change. But as things change, it's important that we keep up. And you know, I'm a person of faith. I believe we've all been given gifts by God, and I believe that if we've been given those gifts, there's a responsibility for us to grow them, to use them, and to be the best that we can be in these areas, and not just be content with doing the same thing day in and day out. If there's more for us to do and more ways that we can help others. So I think that's part of it too.
That's so good. And just thinking about Mega Man 2, spoiler alert, the way to beat Dr. Wily is Bubble Man, you know, using the bubbles. But what's so interesting is, you know, when we were playing that game, we didn't have the internet. So I know when I play modern day video games, I'm going to be honest, Zelda Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games, period. Have you played it?
Absolutely, yeah.
But some of the puzzles are so hard. For instance, I couldn't figure out how to get the Master Sword. And I just spent like an hour just over and over trying different combos and being innovative. And then sadly, I looked it up online. But I remember a time, if we didn't have the internet, I'd probably call you on the phone. Like, have you figured this out? How do video games help you endure or have grit?
Well, you know, is a modern reference point, ask anyone who's played a Dark Souls game. You know, they're notorious for being difficult. Though what I will say is I hadn't played that series until in the recent year. So I picked up the remaster on the PS4 and I started playing it. And my first thought, somewhat controversial, the game is difficult because the control is bad. So we'll talk about accountability later. But you know, part of what made it hard is that it's you know, the control scheme can be a challenge. But so endurance and grit is all about this idea that we build self-efficacy, we build confidence when we persist, when we work at things and we try harder. You know, grit is from Dr. Angela Lee Duckworth. She wrote a book of the same title, Grit, and she looked at what makes some students excel and what sets them apart. Her work, along with Dr. Carol Dweck in the book Mindset, are both really, really great works for those who work with children. If you work in teaching with learning, if you have children, you want to know what are some ways that we can help them be able to endure the challenges rather than folding. Part of it is this practice of being persistent in the face of challenge. And instead of just quitting and saying, that's it, I don't know, getting up, dusting it off and going back at it. And trying again and again. And so, for those of us who were around before, we laugh, Dark Souls, okay, whatever, you didn't grow up playing Adventure Island. Talk about games that are just like, or Little Nemo, the Dream Master. The game's just like, oh, sorry, and the games were tough by design. We find this out now, years later. The reason so many video games were hard back in the 80s and 90s is because Blockbuster Video would rent out the games, and if you could finish the game in a weekend, you wouldn't rent it again, and you sure weren't going to buy it. So by having a game that was so difficult that you couldn't finish it in a single rental, it encouraged kind of that repeat customer. Same thing with arcade machines. Your arcade games had to be so hard that you couldn't finish it on one quarter. Otherwise, you're not making money for the arcade owner. That's not good business if you have customers for an hour off of one quarter when other games are pulling in $150 in that same time.
That's so good.
Persistence and grit.
Well, in kind of so a lifelong goal of mine, going back to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game, I can't tell you how much money we'd spent trying to beat that game, and we'd always get so close, and then eventually we'd run out of quarters. But I actually, a year ago, I invited 3 of my close friends, so it's 4 people all together, and we actually beat the game. Nice. But we actually went to a place called Blue Ghost Arcade, and we just had unlimited tokens. That makes sense why those games were so hard now. And I do wonder, like, when my son, when he's old enough to have kids, if he's going to say, man, video games back in my day were so hard and y'all have it easy. But that remains to be seen. So number 7 is stress relief. Yeah. How could video games help you relieve stress in a healthy way?
Well, each of us have a different style with how we operate under stress. So I think the first thing is we need to know what kind of a stress type or stress person we are, whether we respond to, different ways in our environment. Some people like to be more introspective. Some people want a calming experience. There's a lot of really great games out there you can pick up today that are calming, games that are just about exploration or interaction. I think Zelda Breath of the Wild can be one of those if you play it a certain way, meaning you're just out there to kind of explore and walk around and just enjoy the beauty of it. It can also be really punishing, especially when you're starting out and you walk into a group of enemies and they just one-shot you. That's kind of like, oh. Yeah. Or you fall down a hill and then you catch fire as you're falling down a hill, and then you get a chain reaction. It's like, oh no. But in terms of stress relief, some people want a challenge. They want something where they can get in the zone, and instead of thinking about some of their bigger challenges, just focus on one area, this game, this challenge in front of them, where they have a little more agency, where they have a little more control, where there's that locus of control means maybe I can't deal with some of the things around me, which is always the case. We actually, are not the architects of our own lives as much as it seems that we'd love to be at some points. But I believe that, again, giving us that focus, that area can be really good for playing a game that's a stress reliever, where you're doing activity and it's very satisfying. Or if you like something a little slower paced, a little more puzzle oriented, there's games out there like Flower, I think, is an interesting game for the PlayStation, where you're just flower petals being blown around by the wind. Nintendo has a lot of games like Animal Crossing that are just chill. It's got relaxing music. You're just kind of hanging out. There's not a lot of urgency. The only time you have to really get urgent or worked up is if you shake a tree and bees come out. That can be stress inducing, but it doesn't kill you. You just get a swollen eye. It'll be okay. Sleep it off or take some medicine and we're all good. Or you can just wear a costume that has goggles and no one ever knows. So we found that one out too.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think stress relief is a good use, and I think that has traditionally been a use case. Now I'll say the reverse. If the game is stressing you out, NES, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, seaweed level, I'm looking at you.
Oh my
If the game's
goodness.
stressing you out, and you feel like throwing your controller, maybe this isn't the right game to be trying to wind down to.
Yeah. And I think for me, I was trying to explain to my wife why I like video games, because, that's not really her cup of tea. But I said, sometimes when I'm having a bad day, it's like the one thing I can't control. Like, I can't control how people treat me. I can't control certain situations. But at least in a video game, I know that if I play hard, if I continue, if I work hard, I'm going to eventually beat the game. And then sometimes if you can beat the game, metaphorically, then you can beat the game in real life too. And to me, one of my big goals is just I want to excel at work, but even more importantly, I want to excel as a family man. And also, I'm a Christian, so as a man of faith, I want to honor God in all I do. So point number 8, and this one really I found interesting. You said personal accountability.
Yeah.
And I feel like the world would be a better place if we all took a little bit of accountability for our actions. So now we're going in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Personal accountability is an interesting one. I first was really interested in this topic when I read Jon G. Miller's book, QBQ, The Question Behind the Question. And he dives into a framework that we can use to help eliminate blame and victim thinking. But I started looking at how does this connect with video games? And I realized that it really does. And much like you were describing, there's this sense of control. And so when we pick up a video game, we're faced with challenges. We're faced with difficulty. We're faced with threats. And we have to figure out what to do about it. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of things in the real world that are not ideal, things that are terrible that people have had to face and deal with. But there's also the headaches that we have every day, which is it's raining and I have to get on my car to go get groceries, or, something breaks in the house, or, the car, or we lose a job, or, things get, ramp up in seriousness from there. But in video games, the tendency, right, is not to blame other people. Sure, I did blame the controls for Dark Souls being bad. But in reality, it's not 100%. Even if the controls accounted for 80% of the difficulty, 20% of that's still back on me. And so the idea here is we need to look at what part do I own, even if it's 1%. What is the part that I own? What can I do to be better at that part, whether it's improving abilities or skills, whether it's changing my approach, changing my mindset, changing my beliefs about something. We get this a lot. We tell ourselves stories about the world around us, and then we accept those stories as truth. And sometimes those stories are just not true. The person that cut you off to get that parking spot, it was not personal. But we tell ourselves a story about that, and then we get mad about the stories we tell ourselves. And personal accountability is like, okay, well, what can I do? And so with video games, what can I do to beat this level? How do I solve that puzzle? What can I do differently? How can I learn from my mistakes? We ask ourselves good questions. But sometimes in life, we don't do that. We don't say, okay, well, what did I learn? Or how can I be better? Or what can I do next time? With parenting, we see a behavior we don't like. We ask ourselves the question, this is a tough one, right? What about my parenting style is allowing that behavior? Wow. Now, does that mean that a behavior is 100% the parent's, quote, fault? Not necessarily. But here's the thing. If I don't look at myself, I'm giving up my power. I have no ability to influence this. I'm just a victim. But if I say, what about my parenting styles allowing this? Then I can at least look with an honest opinion and say, okay, well, maybe it's this or that. Maybe I'm too permissive. Maybe I'm too strict. Maybe I need better boundaries. And then we can begin to focus on something we can actually do, which is the good news. If you can do something about it, that means you can change the situation. You can improve it by saying, well, what can I do? Versus just, oh, that's the way it is.
Man, that's well said. And there's a lot to think about, and I'm definitely going to re-listen to this once we're done with this interview. So good. So number 9 is an interesting one. I wrote down money management, how video games can teach you money management. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there's a lot of basic money management skills we can learn from video games. Easy come, easy go.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But you also have to think about it, because there's those basic things that we can learn. Now, not all games have sophisticated economies. Things like time value of money isn't necessarily going to be there. Understanding investments isn't necessarily baked into a lot of games. However, there's the basic ideas, right, which is about resource management, understanding that in order to have these resources, we have to take action. We have to identify opportunities. And we find that there are certain opportunities that provide us a better return on our time. And so understanding that and knowing that is really key to being successful in the in-game economies. Knowing opportunity cost, right? If you're playing a game that has equipment, knowing if you spend, whether it's gems, whether it's dollars, whether it's rupees, whether it's gil, whatever the in-game currency is, if you use it to purchase one type of equipment, that means you don't have it to do other things with. And so you learn quickly about that resource management. And most importantly, you're learning it in an environment that's safe. Meaning that, caveat there. I'm not talking about mobile games. For a minute, let's step away from mobile games, and let's step away from the integration with real world currency, whether that's fiat or cryptocurrency, right? The idea being that in games that are not connected, you have a safe place to learn, where you can practice and you can learn from your mistakes. You can experiment without consequences that extend past the game. Now, we know the future is going to change that. We know that's not, it already has. It already has come, the time's arrived. But when you look at offline gaming experiences, or you look at games that are closed systems, you have the ability to practice and learn safely those basic skills, or basically suffer the consequences. So
exactly. That's so good. And so already they're starting to see that money can take different forms. Even as a teacher, you have US dollars, but some kids would rather have gummy bears. And that could be a currency in itself. Like, I'll trade you these gummy bears for the fruit roll-ups, and so forth and so on. And so I've noticed that our parents might be more reluctant to cryptocurrencies, and maybe you and I are kind of in the middle, like I hope it works out, maybe it doesn't, but I could definitely see our children really embracing cryptocurrencies or a new form of currency, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think part of that's right, risk tolerance when we're younger. Part of it's what we grow up with. Part of it is that emergence that you see, new opportunities, and there's a vision there where we, our generation is kind of, we're like the internet. We can remember a time that it didn't exist. And so having to rely on our vision from what we grew up with, our ingrained beliefs, expectations, habits, and thoughts does shape how we view things, just as much as our children growing up in today's world have a different view of things and see opportunities that maybe to us, we don't even see the opportunities, don't have that vision if we lock on to the old way of doing things. And so there's definitely some important things to understand there for sure.
Exactly. And so the 10th point we have, and this is kind of a bonus one, is video games give you joy and can even improve your mental health. Could you talk about that a little?
Well, again, it might depend on the game.
Yes.
It might depend on the person. Yeah, I know the right ones. Even more than joy and mental health, one of the things that I think video games have to offer us that we can really try to search a bit more for in our own lives is the idea of hope. I think that's something that all video games offer, because not only do games present you with a problem, there's the expectation that within that game's economy, there's a solution. that it's achievable, that it's possible. And too many people in life look at the world around them, and with their finite thinking, they think, well, what's possible for me? Their expectations of what they can do, their own appraisals, or maybe what other people have told them. They try to rely on their own strengths, and they don't have that hope. They don't see beyond and realize that there is more out there than what they might be able to believe in or believe is possible. And so games throw these challenges, but it's easy to face and persist when you know there's an end, when you know there's something to work towards, that it's possible. Yeah. And so that hope that's there is something that's sad to see people in the real world give up on, to see in their own personal lives that they lose that hope, or that they don't have faith in something bigger than them towards that end, towards that bigger picture. And so, I think that to me is an echo. C.S. Lewis talks about in his book, Surprised by Joy, that idea of joy is kind of like this taste, this longing. It's fleeting. It's something that we have these moments where we see what he describes as is a almost like a sliver, a perspective, a glimpse of what heaven might be like. And that in that moment, there's this joy, this sense that overwhelming sense, and that it's elusive, that we try in life to find it. And so again, this idea of joy, this idea of hope is something that is obtainable, I think is what drives people to games. It's why we engage with them. But I would love for others to realize that same joy, that same hope can transcend the games in which they play. So that's just one of my thoughts on that idea of joy and positivity related to games.
Awesome. And you and I both grew up going to Sunday school, and this is kind of a out there question, but do you remember like the Noah's Ark video game they had and some of the Christian video games?
Those Bible Adventures by Wisdom Tree.
It was so fun. And now, are you still a video game collector?
I still have a few. Yes, I got a few laying around.
But I always wonder, like, I wish someone would make a new Noah game for like the year 2022, or like a Moses adventure. It'd be so cool.
They have. It's not that recent. For the Super Nintendo, Wisdom Tree also had. I think it's called Super Noah's Ark 3D. That was a reskin of the game Wolfenstein. to be a first-person shooter, but you weren't shooting. You were gathering the animals for the ark in this 3D environment. So that was not great.
That is awesome. I'm gonna have to try to find that. Yeah. Golly.
And then we talked about Bible Adventures, which was still back to the Nintendo, and that game was just painfully hard. It was brutal. It was punishing. You got to play also as Noah, which I didn't know he deadlifted 3 sheep, and that's or 2 sheep and a cow. That's how he got him in the ark. But it's in the game. It must be canon. But you also got to play as David, as a shepherd collecting sheep. There's a theme here. And then you also got to deliver Moses as a baby. So yes, he did float in the basket, but apparently his sister had to sneak him past the Egyptians and snakes that were back there in Egypt. So
man, I'm just saying, I feel like there's a market for that. So if anyone's listening to this interview and you want to do a GoFundMe, hit me up. I would love my son to be able to play some Bible video games. So Jonathan, I would say you and I are somewhat of experts, at least with old school video games. You more so than me, because you won the regional championship with Blockbuster. I only got second place, but favorite Nintendo video games like NES, old school. List a couple that you really liked.
See, the tendency here, the hard thing is as we're talking, my tendency is to want to reference the ones that we played together. Yeah, because I could give you like the top 5 favorite ones that you and I played together. That comes to mind really quickly. I had such great memories of Mega Man 2. Mega Man 2 is one of the best games of all time for me. It always will be. The music, the graphic, the control, everything about it. It's just a beautiful game. I've played it I don't know how many times. I can clear it in just a little over half an hour. I'm not world record for speed running, but I've watched speed
Wow.
running, and it's amazing to see the techniques that they use. Like, I didn't know this. When you hit the start button in the menu to pull up your weapons, Mega Man jumps up just a touch. Like there's there's like a pixel nudge. And so there was that one part in the Metal Man stage where you're jumping this huge gap, and then there's one of those little sliding spring guys on the other side. And if you miss the jump, you jump too late, you're in trajectory basically just to fall down the hole, and instant death right there. Well, if you're mid-air and you spam the start button, it actually gives you more air time, and you can slide and get a couple extra pixels out, and you can salvage the jump. Little things like that have just been, fun. So that was a great game. For the NES, Mario 3, again, another classic, great game. Mega Man 3 was another one that you and I spent a lot of time with. What was great about that one, Mega Man 3 had these cool cheat codes that required a second person, or tape and rubber bands, but that's not as fun.
That's what I did,
Yeah. And so, your player 2, you plug that second controller in, player 2 could hold right, and you would get this super jump ability that also had this really weird glitch that if you fell down certain bottomless pits with that activated, your energy bar would drain. You'd hear the death sound, but you weren't dead.
Yeah.
And so you basically had like zombie Mega Man. He couldn't use his Mega Buster, so you had to use sub weapons, but you were invincible, and you had the super jump. And then there was like this, I think it might have been A and start or one of those combinations where you could actually like freeze the enemies, like the boss enemies. So when you get to the robot masters, you could actually like hold them in place and then just take advantage of that, just mash on the fire button. So Mega Man 2, Mega Man 3 is up there. TMNT 2 is also just such a great game. Mario 3. And let's see, that's 4 out of them. The fifth
what are your thoughts about the original, or TMNT 1?
Oh, it's terrible. It's a terrible game in every way possible. It's terrible. No. How about the third one? Let's do the third one. TMNT 3, the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
That was a great one. In addition to building on what made the arcade game great, which is that side-scrolling beat 'em up. This one also incorporated some of the later characters. Don't remember the guy's name. There's like a Triceratops that had laser beams, and it just, the graphics were fun. It's a great gem of a game to play on the NES. It's also kind of pricey now these days. Used cartridge goes for $70 plus, and that's just a loose one in okay condition. So I think that would probably round out, for the sake of our conversation, my favorite NES games.
All right, now let's go into Super Nintendo. In my opinion, I think the Super Nintendo was just the golden era of video games. And there's a meme I'm going to show you later, but it's like, was the Super Nintendo the best, or was it just because we were 10 when we played it? But what are some Super Nintendo games where, I've noticed as a teacher, a lot of my kids are playing these old games. And they just admire it, like Donkey Kong Country. Right. I don't want to feed you games, but what do you think?
Well, again, I have to think about the ones you and I played a lot of together that were great. There's obviously Super Mario World. It's just a fantastic game on every level. It's just really one of the quintessential perfect games to pick up and play. Everyone loves it. Even my wife, who doesn't play games, she knows about it. She played it growing up. She knows exactly who Yoshi is. So, it's iconic in that way. The other one that I would say is up there, is just an amazing game, is, of course, the fighting game genre took off. And so you and I clocked a lot of hours on Street Fighter II Hyper Edition. We spent so much time with that game. That was a blast. But I tend to favor Super Street Fighter II. With the addition of the new characters and everything on the Super Nintendo. But that's kind of like a 2-for-1 there. One of the best games of all time also, Final Fantasy III, aka Final Fantasy VI. At the time it was 3 in the US because, Nintendo had not released Final Fantasy 2 or 3 in the US. They gave us 4, they called it 2. So then they gave us 6 and they called it 3. They never gave us 5. until many years later. And that them's the breaks. That's the way that things happened to work during those days. And a lot of times you never knew. You never know what you didn't know because, unless you had an uncle who worked at Nintendo, you never heard about these. So let's see, that's 3 games. A fourth one is one that you and I and the Blockbuster tournament had in common. That was another Ninja Turtles game, Tournament Fighters.
Yes, sir.
And that was great because it took all the Ninja Turtle characters and turned them into fighting characters. But it was a solid fighting game underneath. There was some good mechanics and some fun there. And I learned a lot. And that was one of the games in the tournament that we had to play. And it was also one that you and I had spent a lot of time with. And let's see. Wow.
And can I say something about that
Please.
Ninja Turtles game? So
Yeah.
the Blockbuster tournament had 3 games: NBA Jam, Donkey Kong Country, and the Ninja Turtles tournament. And I remember NBA Jam, I'm 2 years younger than you, but like we were 10 and 12, give or take, playing against these 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds and just kicking butt and taking names. Yeah. I remember getting first place in NBA Jam in my region. We did different regions. I did great in Donkey Kong Country. And then for Turtles in Time, the Ninja Turtles one, I didn't understand the rules. And so I played as Shredder, and I played a strategy where I never got hit. And I just kind of did the same move and just had a perfect score. I just remember bawling my eyes, and my mom even asked the manager of Blockbuster, like, hey, he didn't understand the rules. Like, let him play again. Like, this is his life. But, it's lessons. Like, with video games, you gotta know the rules. What are your thoughts on Donkey Kong Country 2? Is that the best Donkey Kong?
I don't know. I guess it is. I didn't latch on a lot to the Donkey Kong Country series. The music's fantastic in the whole series. The second one, I would say, I have a soft spot in my heart for the first one. I really do. I think that was kind of the groundbreaking game. That was, Nintendo trying out this new approach that, remember, they were competing against, cutting edge graphics, and they're trying to figure out, like, how do we keep bringing in customers against, the Sony PlayStation and all these CD-based, Sega CD was out there at that time, and they were trying to fight them off. And they're like, okay, let's do pre-rendered graphics. And, it created a game that looked very, had an aesthetic that was very sharp to it and looked like it was a new machine, a new level of game. The music was amazing on it, just great soundtrack all around. And it's classic Nintendo. They know how to make a game.
Do you remember how they advertised Donkey Kong Country? Because I do. I
got a VHS cassette.
Do you still have it?
No.
But I remember getting a VHS cassette. I mean, we're going to sound old to anyone who's listening, but a VHS cassette. And I mean, I get it in the mail and I just put it in. I'm just dumbfounded at the graphics. I remember thinking, like, where can technology go? This is awesome. And they just showed how they made the game. So man, such a good thing.
Well, do you remember the end of that too? Do you remember what was at the end of the VHS tape?
I jogged my memory.
So they had this, that was almost like the first, it was like a quasi-viral sort of way of trying to advertise. So you're right, you get this VHS in the mail. It had the green palm trees that were CGI rendered like as the sleeve, like all around the box there, which, who, as a kid, like, someone sent me a VHS tape. This is the coolest thing ever. But right at the end, they walk past this door, and the door's like slightly propped open. They're like, what's going on in there? And they like lean and they open up a door, and they have an early build of Killer Instinct. In the background, there was I forgot his name now. Thunder,
Jago.
I think, was it Jago? Yeah. And Thunder were fighting on the bridge stage, and they like show a bit of a combo, and then they're like, "Oh no, close the door!" It's like very 90s edgy marketing. But I remember, like, what was that? Like, it left an impression on me.
I mean, I really think video games have shaped the culture that we're in too. I mean, do you remember the movie it was this movie about this kid playing this video game, and then all of a sudden in the movie they release Mario 3.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
The Wizard.
And you're like,
the Wizard with Fred Savage. Yeah.
And you're like, what in the world? This game doesn't exist. Then all of a sudden it's there. Let's look at some memes I have. Every interview, at least for now, I like to show some memes. So let's see if I can get this working. Okay. So it says, not sure if SNES games were actually better or just because I was 10. What are your thoughts? Was the Super Nintendo better, or is it just our nostalgia talking?
Well, look, I don't know about better, but this ties into my comment, right? So we're going to salvage this one. And you said it earlier, the fact that kids today will still play games that were originally released on the SNES in a mildly modified or not modified at all form says something to the timelessness of it. So, you know what? Game design, you had to do what you could with what you had. That being said, I also love the Final Fantasy VI pixel remaster that you can get on your computer or your mobile device. And they upped the volume knob and they made the game even better. So I don't know. I think it's a bit of a mix. Because some of the games I've played, and definitely I had nostalgia goggles on, and some of them are just straight up bad. So that's hit or miss. Depends on the game.
Have you played Link's Awakening? So it's a remaster but it's on the Switch.
Yeah.
Dude,
I don't like it.
Oh, really?
I don't like it. I like the Game Boy version. I like my old Game Boy. I put in the hours. I put in the work. I put in the time. That to me was,
Yeah. What a brilliant game,
but I'm glad
it
exists.
I hear you.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, this one hits hard.
I could retire today and not run out of games in my backlog.
Golly. Well, let me say this. One of the guys from my Bible study, he gave me his PS4 because, of course, he has the PS5. But what a cool guy. And I bought 2 games. And one of them is Spider-Man. And I haven't even touched it. Because it's just, well, I got to play it now. But I'm just saying, as adults, we got to make sure we've loved our wives and our children, and make sure you've mowed the lawn. And it's hard to play video games if you haven't finished your responsibilities.
So. So you have to find time. You have to schedule time. That's back to that intentionality. You just have to be intentional about it. For me, when I'm really into that, then I start eyeing, what's going on in my world at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
So maybe I just need to get up at 5 a.m. and, by the way, clear it with the wife and make sure she's good with that, because but she's like, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so I'll get up at 5 a.m. and I'll get in, maybe an hour of game time if I can at that point. But not all the time.
That's cool. No, let me ask you this. I've read a quote that most people have a best-selling book in their heart. It's just a matter of getting it out of them. Right. Didn't you write your book at 5 a.m?
Yes. Can
you walk us through that real
every
quick?
day I would just I'd get up first thing in the morning, set the alarm, get up, I'd go for a little walk, get the blood flowing, and then get to work, sit down and write. And did that every day, and then by the time 7 o'clock rolled around, it was time to transition over to getting ready for work and getting breakfast and doing all that. And you just chip away at it bit by bit.
Amen. And that's one thing I've always admired about you, Jonathan, is just you're definitely a man that puts family first, like God, family, then work. But you also realize that if you want to play video games, if you want to write a book, if you want to have these hobbies, you can just wake up earlier, and there's no excuses to not make your dreams come true.
Yeah. Part of that means going to bed early, though.
Yes.
You don't get up at 5 if you're going to bed at like midnight. That's not a recipe for success.
That is true. All right, here's the next meme. I laugh at my own memes, man. It's a Star Wars meme. It says, "Do you know someone over 30 who still plays video games?" And then the guy goes, "Well, of course I know him. He's me."
Yeah. They need to change that 30 to like 70.
Golly.
And I know
Seriously.
the answer. Yes, I still know people who are 70 who play games. But anyways.
And there's another meme I've seen where nursing homes, like when people are in their 80s and 90s, like it's just going to be us playing Smash Brothers nonstop. And I mean, I think we're going to have a blast.
I don't know if you have this one in the lineup or not. Do you have one with the woman and her elderly mother with the walker? Do you have that meme?
No, I wish I did.
I've seen a version of it where the person who's got their walker, who's late in their years, is saying, I remember when Final Fantasy used to be turn-based. And the girl's like, okay, Grandma, take your meds.
Keep going.
Time for bed.
Dude, for the sake of time, let's finish these memes because memes are like a gold mine. Remember when games didn't have loading times? Pepperidge Farms remembers. Dude, no joke. So I get this PS4 and I get Call of Duty and I'm so excited to play it. It took a day to download.
Yeah.
And that's me with fiber internet. And I know some young person's going to say, you need to put an Ethernet cable. Well, I didn't have one, so.
I can mail you one. The load times, you see, that's the thing. The cartridge-based games, you very rarely saw load time. It wasn't until I played Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the Super Nintendo, which is an amazing feat of programming that they even got that thing to work on there. It's really amazing. But it had load times, and it had load times at the wrong place, like before the announcer says fight. So, the biggest thing when we were young is, especially on the Super Nintendo, is you had to wait for the developer logos when you first put the game in. And some of them wouldn't let you hurry up. And so you had like 5 to 8 seconds of introductory logos that you were just waiting for. Like, okay, let me play.
Yeah. Well, now let me ask you, you and I have spent so much time playing Street Fighter. Are any of the newer Street Fighters worth playing? I have a PS4 now.
Yeah. Street Fighter 4. Specifically Street Fighter 4 Ultra Arcade Edition. Yeah, they still have trouble counting. That's fantastic. I'm not really into 5 a whole lot. There's a lot I didn't care about for 5, and the aesthetic, the visuals of it. It just feels, it's very tournament focused. Street Fighter 4 is like Street Fighter 2 all over again, but even more awesomer. So yeah, I recommend if you can pick up Street Fighter 4 or 4 Ultra, that one's a high recommend on my list.
Is 4 Ultra better than 4?
It just adds more characters, more moves.
Okay. Just
like the way that Super added to 2. So, you had 2, then Champion Edition, then Hyper Fighting, then Super Turbo, and then they counted to 3 finally. So that's the same with 4. 4 had, I think, a couple editions. You had the Launch Edition, you had Ultra, you had Arcade Edition, and those just add on a couple characters. I think the only one you can buy now might be kind of that last version, unless you pick up the disc or stuff like that. But it launched on the PS3, so.
Well, I can't wait till we're both great grandfathers and our great grandchildren are playing Street Fighter 8 because they count so slow. All right, let's do the next one. Okay, Jonathan.
Speaking of,
this place looks safe. I'll just park my car here. So, for anyone who's not our age, why is this being funny?
Yeah, that's the bonus stage in Street Fighter 2, where you given a timer and you basically just have to smash that car down into its little tiny pieces. Yeah.
Okay, this is just making fun of us. 1996. Wow, these graphics are amazing. And in true story, I remember playing Mario 64 and just being stunned. Like the awe and wonder. The jump of graphics from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64. And I would go to the mall and my mom would shop and I would just play these demo versions nonstop. And then the meme has 2020, the graphics could be better. And
They start saying, "Oh, these textures are terrible. Look at the textures, the light reflection. Look at the puddles. There's no puddles."
It's so, and Jonathan, we'll have to talk later. I'd love to play some games with you, whether online or, Jonathan still lives near my hometown in Florida, so maybe we can do that then. Here's the last meme, and y'all today spend too much time on devices. Me in 1987 spending 3 days trying to make this jump. Can you tell us a little bit about this Mario version?
Yeah, I thought someone might call me out and fact check me on this, but if I'm not mistaken, that's the Mario the Lost Levels, which was in Japan that was called Mario 2. In the US, it was later released as part of the Mario All Stars collection on the Super Nintendo. But that's the NES or the Famicom version in Japan there, unless it's a really obscure part of the Eighth World. But it was really bad for having these jumps where, in order to make those, you couldn't actually hop the short ones. You had to run full speed, which took a lot of guts and a lot of practice, because some of those jumps were just terrible. You miss the jump, you're dead. And you do that 3 times, and back to the beginning of the game, unless you started using some of the cheats or secrets there to get some extra lives. So. But that's that's true.
And as we wrap up things, a couple more thoughts is I feel that my years of playing video games, growing up as a kid, I'll find even in the work world that there will be these situations with a problem, and I'm generally one of the first people to come up with a solution. And I honestly think it's from all the hours of playing Zelda and strategies and puzzles. Would you say the same thing with you in work environments or even with your family? Like, okay, how do I fix this?
Yeah, I mean, I've absolutely done that. Even when I was in college and I was working a job as a waiter, it's like, how do we make this a game? How do I imagine layers of those mechanics into the work itself? How do I, step up and say, basically, this is, a problem we can solve. So I definitely have directly and indirectly benefited from those experiences. And that's why I wrote the book I did. That's why I love sharing these ideas with others, because a lot of people don't realize that those skills and abilities you wish you had, you might have actually been practicing them while playing games. And then just take that same mindset, take that same mentality and say, okay, if this situation or this problem was a side mission in a game, what would I do? How would I solve it? What resources would I need? Maybe I need to recruit people for a team. And, in multiplayer games, you go on and you get a team together and you assemble them based on strengths and weaknesses and things that you can work together and collaborate with. The same is true in the work world or other things that we take on. The mentality is what we just have to flick the switch and ask ourselves, if this was a game, how would I solve it? How would I win?
That's good. Now, Jonathan, I've noticed like a life-changing book in the background. Could you tell me a little bit about that book? Is it Mastering the Game?
Yeah, that's it up here, Mastering the Game. It's, what video games can teach us about success in real life. And we explore a lot of the different ideas that you and I have talked about today and many more. I reference over 150 video games throughout the video game history catalog. So it's not just games that are designed to teach us, but rather games that are designed to entertain us and what we can learn from them, and some strategies and ways that you and I can make sure that we redeem the time we spent with those games in a way that can be in service to others and in our own lives as well.
That's good. And is there anything you want this audience to hear about, like how to connect with you, or in addition to checking out your book on Amazon or whatnot?
Yeah, right now, I mean, the book is on Amazon. You can get the ebook for just a couple bucks. I think it's free under the other plan where if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can do that. Enjoy it. If it's something that you say, it's beyond reach out to me. I'm happy to get digital copies out to people that aren't capable of, making that commitment. But it's best way to reach me is probably just shoot me an email. That's a good way to reach me. It's Jon, Jon, at Jon D as in David Harrison.com. And then I also have a website, classicallytrained.net. It probably needs some updates, but use a lot of good articles there that you can look at. And one of the other fun things I do is I take quotes from video games and I make little like inspirational images with them. So they're actual video game quotes that are said by characters in the game, but I've identified ones that I think have application to our lives. And then I usually make a few comments about them at the bottom. And all the artwork there is usually screen captures that I've done from the games myself. So it's somewhat original in that regard. That's the beautiful thing about, photo mode in the modern games is that you can get some really stellar in-game image capture. So classicallytrained.net. It's kind of like the shirt here, classically trained. So that's what I would say. That's ways to.
And can we buy one of those shirts? Are those for sale?
These are not mine. I mean, I'm wearing it, but
okay.
It's not something that. I mean, I called it classicallytrained.net years ago. That was back in 2013, I think, that I started to launch the website. Might have been 2013. But I started seeing that slogan show up on shirts like these, which this shirt is not that old. So no, it's not mine. Although I do have some shirts. It's funny you mentioned this. I started a Teespring account, and I'll shoot you the link. I started making some shirts there in preparation for my next book, and the shirts say, "If video games have taught me anything," and then I have a little artwork in the middle, and then I have a little lesson. So the Castlevania Symphony of the Night shirt says, "If video games have taught me anything, man is a miserable pile of secrets." And so, I've got one from, Legend of Zelda. Video games have taught me anything, it's dangerous to go alone. And so I've got a series of, and then I got a little pencil sketch, a digital sketch that I did of the Master Sword. So, just ideas like that. They reference video games that many people know. And that's just a fun way to pick that up. So I do have shirts. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll send you the link.
Jonathan, thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. And man, I'm just excited, and I look forward to future conversations.
All right. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.